Hey everybody, Onan here. So I'm recording this on the morning of Christmas Eve 2024. So Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone who ca- falls upon this video in the next week or so. It's been a little while since I posted. I've been very, very busy at home, at work, a lot of end of the year kind of business stuff and planning for the next year. And with Christmas and New Year's falling right in the middle of the week, it's going to be tough for me to live stream for the next 2 weeks. So I wanted to do a video um, that is, I think, very, very important. So as you've come to learn, I have my own personal feelings, many of them strong and um, unfavorable towards NFP. But as I've kind of reflected and grown and thought more about things, um, I, and in having used NFP successfully for once for over a year now, I'm starting to think that NFP isn't really the problem. I mean, it's a problem depending on the circumstances of everything else that's going on in the home, in the marriage, in the relationship. And I know that a lot of people that are members of our UCM community um, feel strongly that contraception should be um, considered a viable alternative to NFP. And I actually don't personally feel that way. Um, I mean, I'm not unsympathetic to the arguments, and I think there is some merit, but I have a number of reasons why I don't think that's the solution, both practically and principally. And so, first of all, on a practical, well, let's see, on a principle level, the main reason I hesitate with the idea that contraception is sort of something that God wants or designed for us is it's it's a very, very recent phenomenon in history that we have any kind of reliable contraception. Certainly it's been tried throughout time, but when you read the history of contraception and some of the things that people used to do to try and prevent conception, ranging from eating certain types of plants, using oils, stuffing crocodile dung up where. I mean, um, they we really, until we had the um birth control pill, and I guess to some degree condoms and things like that, which are, I don't know, I think for the most part um products of the 20th century, really the mid 20th century. um Maybe if you want to be kind of err on the conservative side, early 20th century. I don't know what kind of birth control was in play when the Anglicans sort of opened the door for that in the 1930s, which precipitated Casti Connubii. But Humani Vitae really came out in response to the advent of the hormonal birth control pill in like the 1950s or so, maybe early 1960s. I'm not sure exactly. But that was really what put it was seen as a new birth control option. And so, at least ostensibly, the purpose of the birth control commission, or whatever they called it prior to Humanae Vitae, was to study whether the use of hormonal birth controls, which use natural hormones to essentially mimic pregnancy, I believe, which stops a woman's body from ovulating. So that was new. And so they were looking primarily at that issue itself. Was this new drug, which was based on natural hormones, as opposed to prior, let's say, barrier methods and things like that, was this compatible with church teaching? Um, for those that aren't aware, the commission itself, which I think lasted like 2 or 3 years, right around the time of Vatican II, overwhelmingly supported permitting hormonal birth control, at least to some extent. And it was very much the minority opinion that it should not. And a significant reason, I don't think there's really any dispute, a significant reason for the minority position is they really feared the fallout from sort of this kind of drastic change to church teaching, and the fear that that would undermine people's confidence in the church. It it was very much on that, and the fact that this is essentially extending prior teaching to hormonal birth control was correct. It really, the minority opinion, which became, let's say, the majority opinion in Humanae Vitae, didn't really address, I guess, the unique circumstances of the birth control pill. But be that as it may, that was the decision that Paul VI reached in Humanae Vitae. He went along with the quote unquote minority view at that time. So, you know, if you really consider that, the first time that the church, I would say, seriously considered the topic of birth control pills, at least, was in the 1968, when Humanae Vitae came out, which is extremely recent in great scheme of things. Um, and so getting back to my point, it's hard for me to imagine that, I guess, left the first 99% of history, human history, Catholic history, Christian history, kind of without a reasonable way of limiting conception. So that, to me, I guess I would say, is one principled reason why I don't see birth control as being the kind of the real solution to the problem. I'm not saying that it maybe can't be a solution, but I think on that. So that's one principal reason where I think birth control isn't really the answer. Even if, even if we had a time machine, we went back to 1960s, I would have that same concern. Okay. A practical reason is kind of going back to the Birth Control Commission and Humanae Vitae. Is, I mean, that was, I mean, the church gave strong, at least appears to have given strong consideration to adjusting its teaching on birth control, at least with respect to the hormonal birth control pill. Called together a whole commission, had had an extensive meetings, had bishops coming out in favor of it, bishops that initially had been opposed to it, but after seeing all of the material and hearing the lectures, changed their mind. There was some significant changes in opinion of some influential clergy in the church. And now, one of the reasons, kind of getting back to my earlier point, one of the reasons that I think ultimately if Casti Connubii had not come out in the 1930s, I think the chances of Humani Vitae having reached a different conclusion were much better. But for the same reason that Humani Vitae is of recent vintage to us, Casti Connubii was of extreme recent vintage to the church, as it, you know, even now, but certainly back in the 1960s, that was only 30 years earlier. There was less time between Casti Connubii and Humani Vitae than there is between Humani Vitae and the current date. Okay, so that was one. I think Casti Connubii, for better for worse, kind of which unfortunately didn't have the type of commission, didn't have the type of, at least from what I can tell, the type of background consideration that at least seems to have gone into Humani Vitae. And more importantly, it was reacting to a move made by the Anglicans. And so I think it is important to recognize that the Humani Vitae and Casti Connubii arose out of distinctly different circumstances. Now, maybe it doesn't matter, but reaction to what the Anglicans had done as was really, I would say, more of an organic process. I think most of the other non-Catholic Christian churches had already followed the Anglicans as of the 1960s. So the church was really, like I said, it really came about with the introduction of the hormonal birth control pill. So that's a long way of saying, if there was any chance that contraception was going to be permitted, it was going to happen in the 1960s. But now we have really all of the same reasons that weighed in favor of Humani Vitae in the minority view. Plus, we have now Humani Vitae, and we have theology of the body, and what is it, 40, 50 years, 40, 50 some years of, pretty, you know, John Paul II writings, a lot of it condemning contraception, promoting NFP. And so I just think, as a practical matter, that ship has sailed, whether we like it or not. I think trying to get contraception back on the table at this point is a completely lost effort. I mean, the church was so concerned about a fracture back then that I just don't even think it's going to consider it now. At least that's my own personal view. And so there's one principled and one practical reason why I don't think contraception is the answer. The other things are a little more, I would say, less significant, but still distinct nonetheless. One, I mean, there are health consequences to hormonal birth controls and IUDs. Not so much with barriers like condoms, but I mean, sterilization. I mean, you're doing something invasive, and you can't really undo that, at least not easily. I also think that, as much as the abstinence sucks with NFP, there is a benefit to it. And at least in my marriage, I think contraception would would introduce a host of other problems into our marriage, when, for the most part, sex is always available. And then but I think that the reasons why sex doesn't happen now would still be present there. Children being overwhelmed, lower desire by my wife, etc. Now, probably we would have less children, and so maybe the circumstances would be different if we had 4 kids or 5 kids instead of 9. I don't know, but I think a lot of the difficulties we have now would be present with the use of contraception. Plus, I think there would be just a constant temptation towards resentment, probably from my wife, from me to my wife, because she says no when she doesn't have to say no, and probably from my wife to me for wanting, pestering her and putting that pressure on her. So at least for us, maybe other people have different marriages, better marriages, whatever. But I think for us, having it more or less always available it at least presents its own challenges to the marriage. Okay. So where does that leave us? So I guess I'm back to NFP, and I do like 90% of NFP. What makes NFP difficult, or especially difficult, is if you package it with the other traditional church teachings, that being no masturbation and presumably no other acts. I mean, honestly, that is what makes NFP nearly impossible for most couples, or those that do it, extremely difficult. It is absolutely the thing that has made NFP really, really difficult in our marriage, is the um, feeling that, well, we can't do anything, or I can't do anything during those stretches when we have to abstain. I have yet to find a way to get through those stretches without some resort to those things. My celibacy challenge notwithstanding, that was literally the only time in our marriage that I went for an extended period of time without anything. Now maybe that just means I'm a weak guy, but I think I'm probably fairly representative of most men. And if I'm being fair, I think I probably have a capacity for self-control that a lot of men maybe don't have. I'm a pretty disciplined, determined guy, but I find this just extremely difficult. So what's the Onan solution? The Onan solution, and this is not to be taken as theological advice, and I fully acknowledge that this is not consistent with what seems to be mainstream Catholic teaching, but I think most couples can do NFP if they are permitted, maybe with some qualifications, but permitted to engage in other acts as a couple, and if necessary, solo acts. I think that the all the arguments for contraception, I think, all the more apply to other acts of masturbation, which literally have no health consequences, provided they're done in moderation, and in fact have probably have benefits to the individual, to the couple, to the marriage, that abstinence does not provide. It is not a substitute for sex, and I think every couple, with few exceptions, if given the option, would choose the full conjugal act over even the best of other acts, and certainly the best solo, at least I think for the most part. And so it's not going to substitute that, but it makes it possible to go periods, sometimes extended periods, maybe even indefinitely, for couples that have really, maybe menopausal, maybe there's a health issue, maybe there's a paralysis, something where, like, physically someone cannot engage in the act. The human body is very flexible, um, from how it can be used and how couples can engage with each other when they can't engage in the conjugal act. And it's still going to be a sacrifice, but it is a far more bearable sacrifice, and I would say a fruitful sacrifice, than abstinence is or ever will be. And so that's my solution. Allow in, if continue to not permit contraception, at least in the vast majority of circumstances, and then freely not just permit, but encourage couples to use their creativity to engage in other perfectly natural sexual acts, and then also when even those are not available, to make it clear that if one or both spouses needs to engage in solo acts, provided it's not done with the use of porn and it's not something that's done becomes a habitual habit that interferes with the rest of your life. Like if you're doing it more than once a day, you probably have a problem. But if that's not the case, I think if you permit that, I think you present a situation that most marriages can not only survive but actually thrive under and still be oriented towards fruitfulness. I think a lot of couples would still choose to have, let's say, larger than normal families. So that's the Onan solution. Don't follow that advice necessarily, but if I feel very, very strongly that this is the only thing that can save church teaching and Humani Vitae and all that. So I'm throwing that out there. Appreciate your guys' comments, good, bad, or otherwise. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I hope you all have a terrific Christmas season with your family, and that you have a great beginning of the next year. So talk to you later.